That's a lot of comments, man. Okay, let's get the fucking Venti versus Kazuha shit out of the way now, so we can skip every Venti versus Kazuha team question after that. Here's the way I think about it. Most units in this game, they're like Swiss Army knives. There's a lot of things they can do. You can use them in a lot of different situations. Venti isn't like that. Venti is like a fucking wrench, right? They use to turn like big ass bolts. If you try to use a Swiss Army knife with a wrench branch on it to loosen a big ass bolt, it's possible you'll be able to do it, but like it's very clearly not the tool that was made for the job, right? Whereas if you try it with Venti, it's gonna be smooth like butter. The best way to visualize Venti basically is as the counter to a specific type of content in the game. Venti isn't a unit that you pull for to make your specific teams stronger. Venti is a unit that you pull for to make your matchup against specific content better. That being said, in recent Abysses, the content that Venti counters, well, it hasn't been very present. I don't think that it won't be again. I think it not having been present in recent Abysses is basically a sign that miHoYo's like, yeah, Venti's been good, like too good, for too long. Before the first time we really had heavy single target or heavy enemies situations, Venti was basically good every single Abyss. I think that the most healthy way to balance Venti is to, about half the time, have content where he's good, or a third of the time. And I think that's what miHoYo is gonna do. Another thing that people often fail to realize is that even when Venti isn't good on every chamber, it's really, really rare that Venti isn't good anywhere. Let's go take a look at Spiral Abyss matchups, the ones that have been quote-unquote bad for Venti, right? And this was the first one that was like arguably bad for Venti. But if you actually like think about it, this was before the Nobushi nerf, the Nobushi and Kairagi nerf. And unironically, in my opinion, the hardest chamber of that Abyss was chamber 1. And Venti was hella fucking good against this. Now for this one, this was actually an Abyss where Venti wasn't that good. But even then, Venti was really, really good on chamber 1 first half and on chamber 2 second half. And so if you were willing to reset and change your teams around for specific chambers, Venti still had a lot of value. Being able to group these enemies together is so valuable and like prevent them from attacking. He obviously didn't have much value here though. The Pyrolector Abyss, Venti was actually really good here because really, really valuable against this chamber. You get to clear the first wave really quickly and you get to group the enemies really quickly as well. And pretty valuable in chamber 2 because actually grouping the heralds is really valuable, especially if you freeze them together. And then he wasn't very valuable in chamber 3, but in my opinion, chamber 3 was the easiest one of the 3, as long as you were willing to reset and change your teams around. And in current Abyss, he's not very good. There's only been 2 Abysses that don't have a chamber where Venti's just really good. And so even though they've been focused on making Abysses that like quote unquote counter Venti, he still has a lot of value every once in a while. Another thing about Venti is people often forget about his energy refund, which is really, really fucking good. Even when he's not the wrench against the bolt, right? Even when he's not against his specific type of content, he's not bad. He's just not a broken unit, but he's still a solid fucking unit. He's still not bad at all. But yeah, like in terms of like, should you pull for him? The reality is it depends on what you want. Venti will basically never, unless you're playing a Morgana team, the best way to make your teams do more damage. Venti is a way to negate a specific type of content, which in my opinion is annoying. Mobbing content where there's a lot of small enemies is really fucking annoying. You always run out of stamina chasing after enemies. I hate it. And Venti just solves that. You'll never be in a situation where you need to pull for Venti. Venti's a very nice comfort unit to have though. If you're only using one team that would want a Kazuha, for example, let's say you're playing like this on one side and an Ito team on the other side, or this and an Ito team, right? Kazuha is not a good pull for your account because Kazuha is not actually an improvement over Sucrose in this team. And even in teams where he is an improvement over Sucrose, like in vape teams where he's an improvement over Sucrose, it's a very small improvement. And so Kazuha doesn't actually have that much value in situations like that. It's either when you're playing teams where Sucrose isn't that good, so mono element teams, or you're playing 2 teams that would want a Kazuha slash Sucrose. So for example, you've got this team on one side and you've got an Ayaka team on the other side. Can I imitate a Venti voice line? I'm gonna assume he wants the Japanese voice lines.
ここだよ
Kokodayo?
ここだよ
Kokodayo?
風だ
Kazeda? There's your imitation. In response though, Mr. Socks, when is your Shinyan guide coming out? Does Venti really lose his value against larger enemies? He does lose value, but he doesn't become useless. He's just not as good as he is against smaller enemies. I have Ganyu and I was thinking about pulling Venti to play Morgana or the Chinese version of Morgana. Do I think it's worth, or should you just save and wait for Kazuha? It's definitely, I'm not a fan of the Morgana team. I don't think it's fun to play. And I think it's a little bit situational, which I don't quite like all that much. But if it's a team you want to play, then yeah, going for Venti is definitely a good idea. How strong does Venti suck? It's a lot stronger than like all the other Animo characters. Its range and strength is like really a lot. Do I pull for Venti or wait and C6 my Razor? Well, Razor is not a particularly good unit, but it's up to you, I guess. I would go for Venti out of those two things. Full EM or crit? Especially since Venti doesn't have talents like Kazuha that benefit from having tons of EM. If crit is better, how much EM does Venti need? Okay, the answer to the full EM or crit question is yes. You can honestly go for either because they're very similar in damage output. Crit build scales slightly higher because your crit, your attack, and your damage multiply themselves together, whereas your EM is just like it doesn't multiply with other stats. And so when you have a lot of them, it's better to go for a crit build. But like the breakpoint where crit starts being better than EM is like a really high investment. And so realistically, they're basically the same. However, there's an exception to that, which is when Venti triggers chain reaction. So for example, if I play a team like this, Venti's actually getting a few of the electrocharge reactions. I don't think he's on the right stuff, is he? Yeah, he isn't, yeah. But his EM is killing both his normal swirl damage and the damage he does when he triggers electrocharge. So that's a situation where the EM build is basically just always better. What weapons do I recommend for Venti and Freeze comps with either Ganyu or Ayaka? Are there any good team comps outside of Freeze for Venti? His weapons depend quite a bit. In freeze teams, you might actually find yourself in situations where you don't actually generate enough energy, which means that Fav is actually a pretty decent option on him. Otherwise, Viridescent Hunt is always a good weapon on Venti. I mean, Viridescent Hunt is a good weapon on everyone, but what Viridescent Hunt lets you do is it lets you group enemies for longer and sometimes abuse fall damage. And then obviously, because of the whirlwind, you keep enemies grouped for longer. That being said, it is a weapon that needs like micromanaging. You need to remember to use it properly. If you buy the battle pass and you have this, you might want to give it a shot. Then otherwise, Stringless is very good. Generally with what's considered the best 4-star option for him because it gives him EM, but it also scales his damage. And when you go full EM, like you still do some of your damage with your talents and all that shit. And so this is still actually useful. Other way around, when you go crit, you still do some damage with your swirls, and so the EM is still actually useful. And because the passive is so good, it just ends up being a solid choice all around. Windbloom Ode, very similar in that regard. Now for the 5 stars, Elegy is obviously the best one because it gives you a bit of EM, right? 60 EM at the as a baseline, and another 100 when you proc the effect, which is like almost as much as a level 90 Stringless in terms of elemental mastery. But then on top of that, you get ER substat, which helps with your substats a lot, and you get the effect that's just good for the rest of your team, right? Like Elegy is like basically almost as much damage as the other weapons, except it also has a really useful effect. So Elegy is generally Venti's best in slot. Skyward Harp is also fine, but Stringless is actually like High Refined Stringless is often better than Skyward Harp on Venti because the EM is valuable. Even on a crit build, the EM is very valuable. And then, is there any good team comp outside of Freeze for Venti? Animo Quick Swap cores are really strong. So if you play Venti and Kazuha together, and then you've got basically 2 options. It's Animo Pyro Quick Swap and Animo Quick Swap with Electrocharge. So Animo Pyro Quick Swap is Venti, Kazuha, Bennett, Xiangling. I find it to be a team that is both like quite strong and really straightforward and easy to play. And there's the with Electro Charge, in which you generally want to play Thundering Fury Kazuha with like Barbara Fischl or Kokomi Fischl. But those teams aren't very popular, so generally it's not really a team comp for Venti. Venti isn't part of your team comp. What's the ER you want on Venti in order to spam burst off cooldown? It really depends on the team, but we can do it for an Ayaka. We can figure it out for an Ayaka team. So in a team like that, he's gonna need something like 125, between 120 and 140 ER, basically. There are gonna be teams where he needs more ER. So for example, let's say there's a team where you use him and you only get 1 E per rotation, because you can't really swap into him. And it's a like shortish rotation, so you get like 15 particles total. Then you're gonna need something like 200 ER. One of the upsides of Elegy is that it has an ER substat, which makes it really fucking easy for you to meet the ER requirements of basically any team. Yeah, and he also gets 32% ER from his Ascension. I already have C0 Kazuha. Is it worth to pull Venti or wait for C2 Kazuha? Same thing as usual as earlier. C2 Kazuha is just gonna give you more damage. Venti is gonna give you a way to solve a specific type of conflict. Is Venti mandatory for Morgana? He isn't mandatory, but I would say he is a lot better than the other options, because not only does he group enemies very, very tightly together, which makes it like, which buffs Ganyu's damage by like taking advantage of that like quote unquote quadratic scaling. He also helps with the energy generation so fucking much. Ganyu's energy generation is actually really shit. She gets 4 particles from herself per rotation. If you play her with Rosaria, that's another 6, which is 10 particles, which is like 30 energy. Then with an Animo and a Hydro character, you'll maybe get another 10 particles, but that's only gonna be like 6 to 10 energy, right? So it's between like 35 and 40 energy that you're generating. Because her burst cost is 60, then you end up needing 150 to 170 ER. What Venti does in this team is by making sure your burst infuses cryo, you reduce Ganyu's energy cost by 15, which means it's 45. Which means that 35 to 40, you need a lot less ER. You're gonna be able to get away with like 120. You're making your ER requirements so much fucking lower, to the point where you gain more damage from not needing those ER substats than you would from something like Kazuha's passive. And so he's basically just the best choice all around for that team. Obviously, that doesn't mean mandatory. Just because someone's the best choice doesn't mean you need to go for them. Ganyu teams are strong enough in AoE situations that you'll probably be just fine if you use Kazuha or Sucrose instead. If Venti's energy restoration is an advantage that other animal characters don't have, how do you prove that it increases the team's total DPS, and when is that advantage better than other animal characters' advantage? Basically, what Venti's energy restoration does is it reduces the ER requirements on your team. So for example, if you're generating 40 energy for a character that has an 80 cost burst, the ER requirement will be 200%. With Venti, this goes down to 65, so it's a 37.5% less ER that you need, which is almost 7 rolls of energy recharge. 7 rolls of energy recharge is 34% attack percent, 45% crit value, 45% crit damage. Obviously though, it doesn't work exactly like that because artifact RNG comes into play. Maybe your best build that has under 200 still has like 180 because your good artifacts just happen to have ER. But also, maybe your only build that has at least 200 has like 230 because you're forced into an ER sans, right? So basically, it really fucking depends. You'll see the biggest increase in teams that just don't generate a lot of energy. So if the energy generated was like 30 instead of 40, this 37.5 goes to 50. So yeah, at the end of the day, it depends on what team, it depends on how much energy you're generating, and yeah, that's basically what it is.